You know, as you look at this, what do you want the nation to know about your former
let me just tell you
attorney being
about that
sentenced
tabloid.
yesterday?
I don't think, and I have to go check, I don't think they even paid any money to that tabloid, okay?
In an interview with then-President Donald Trump, Harris Faulkner did something she hadn't done before. She not only confronted him on tough issues, but for the first time in her career, she let her personal life and emotions mix with her professional role as a journalist. At the time of the interview, Donald Trump was still the president, and that's exactly why Harris was holding him accountable. So what exactly did she confront him about? And how did Trump react to her strong and emotional stance? Let's find out. Who is Harris Faulkner? But before you see why she responded the way she did and why this issue was personal to her, you need to know who really is Harris Faulkner. Let's hear her story first. Harris Kimberley Faulkner was born on October 13, 1965 in Atlanta, Georgia. From the very beginning, her life was shaped by some strong influences. One of the most significant was her father, Bob Harris. Bob Harris was a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army, so you can imagine the kind of discipline and resilience she grew up with. Harris has talked about how her father's military background shaped her work ethic, her approach to life, and even how she deals with tough situations. Growing up in a military family, she learned early on that you don't back down easily, you stand your ground, and you always keep going no matter what life throws at you. But it was not just discipline and hard work that shaped Harris. She grew up in a black family in a time when life was not exactly smooth sailing. The struggles of being part of a black family in America during those years were not lost on her. Harris has shared how her family faced challenges that many black families still face today, like racism, inequality, and having to work twice as hard to get half as much recognition. That reality played a big part in making her the strong, determined person we see today. She is someone who knows the value of perseverance because she's lived it. Harris's early years were not just about learning discipline from her dad or dealing with the challenges of being a black family in America. Education was also a huge focus for her. She attended the University of California, Santa Barbara, where she graduated with a degree in mass communications. That set her up for the career she was about to get into. And trust me, once she got going, she didn't stop. So how did she enter the media industry? Harris didn't jump straight into the big leagues, she worked her way up. She started in smaller markets first. Her career kicked off with an internship at Case Cop TV in Los Angeles, but she quickly made her way to reporting gigs in Greenville, North Carolina, and later Kansas City. That's where she started making a name for herself, not just as a reporter, but as someone who had the ability to cover both hard news and emotionally charged stories. One thing that set Harris apart early on was her no-nonsense, straightforward reporting style. She was not afraid to ask tough questions or cover difficult topics, which made her stand out in a field that can sometimes feel crowded. Her hard work paid off when she won multiple Emmy Awards, including one for Best Newscaster and another for covering an investigative report on child abuse. Now, let's talk about Fox News, where Harris really rose to fame. She joined the network in 2005, and over time, she became one of the most recognized faces on the channel. You probably know her best from Outnumbered, which is a show she co-hosts, and The Faulkner Focus, where she leads discussions on some of the most pressing issues of the day. At Fox, Harris became known for her sharp questioning, insightful commentary, and ability to hold her own in debates. She is not just a pretty face on TV. Harris brings substance, depth, and passion to everything she covers. That's why, when she sat down with then-President Trump, it was not just another interview. Harris knew she had a responsibility to bring up issues that matter to her community and to herself. So what did they talk about in the interview? We will find out in a bit. For now, let's not forget the long list of achievements Harris Faulkner has collected over the years. Aside from her Emmy wins, she has written 2 books. Her first was Breaking News: God Has a Plan, An Anchorwoman's Journey Through Faith. This book gives readers a deeper look into her life, faith, and how she juggles everything. Her second, 9 Rules of Engagement, A Military Brat's Guide to Life and Success, is full of advice she learned from her dad's military background. On top of that, Harris has been named to Power 150 by Ebony magazine, a list that celebrates the most influential black people in America. She is also a frequent keynote speaker and has become an inspiration to many, particularly women of color, who look up to her as someone who has broken barriers in the field of journalism. Now that you know more about her background, it will be easy to see why the interview with Trump was so personal to Harris. So, what exactly did they talk about in the interview? The infamous interview. It was June 2020, and the US was deep in the middle of several major crises. The pandemic was raging, people were struggling, and then came the heartbreaking death of George Floyd. His tragic death ignited protests across the country and the world. It was at this pivotal moment that Harris Faulkner sat down with then-President Donald Trump for what would become one of the most talked about interviews of her career. Before we talk about the interview itself, you need to understand why this was such a big deal. And it all starts with George Floyd. On May 25, 2020, Floyd, a black man, was killed by a Minneapolis police officer named Derek Chauvin. The officer kneeled on Floyd's neck for a horrifying 8 minutes and 46 seconds, even after Floyd repeatedly said he could not breathe. Those 3 words, "I can't breathe," became a rallying cry for justice as people watched the shocking footage of Floyd's final moments. This news story struck a nerve. Floyd's death was not an isolated incident. It was a reminder of the many other black men and women who had died at the hands of police. People were furious, heartbroken, and fed up with a system that seemed to offer no justice. The Black Lives Matter movement surged into the streets again, but this time it was not just black people protesting. People from all races, ages, and backgrounds came together demanding accountability, equality, and major changes to the way law enforcement treated people of color. Protests exploded across the U.S. from major cities to small towns. The protests became so much more than just to seek justice for George Floyd anymore. They were now for every unarmed black person who had been mistreated, beaten, or killed by the police. The outcry was massive, and it didn't take long for these protests to spread around the world. Floyd's death became a symbol of all the injustices that had been bubbling beneath the surface for far too long. Now, with that backdrop in mind, you can see why this interview between Harris Faulkner and Donald Trump was so important. The entire country was in turmoil, and Trump as president was expected to address the situation. But this interview was not just about policy or political strategies. It was personal for Faulkner, and you could feel it in her approach. From the very start, it was clear that this was not going to be your typical softball interview. Here, Faulkner was a black woman, a mother, and someone who deeply understood the pain so many people were feeling. That gave the interview an emotional weight that we don't always see in these kinds of political conversations. So what was discussed between them? One of the key issues Faulkner brought up was the protests and how the country was handling the racial tensions that had exploded after Floyd's death. Trump, known for his law and order stance, focused heavily on the idea that the protests had turned into riots. He emphasized how he believed stronger action should have been taken by local leaders to stop the unrest. He said that he was more focused on restoring order than addressing the root cause of why people were in the streets protesting in the first place. Faulkner, however, wanted to talk about more than just law enforcement. She asked Trump how he planned to unite the country during such a painful, divided time. As someone who grew up in a black family and had faced these struggles firsthand, she was looking for answers about how the president would address the systemic racism that had led to Floyd's death and so many others like him. It looked like Faulkner wanted real solutions, and she was not going to let Trump dodge the tough questions. Trump's responses often focused on how great the economy had been before the pandemic hit, and how well his administration had done with criminal justice reform and supporting the black community through opportunity zones and HBCU funding. He repeatedly highlighted his administration's efforts to create jobs and improve the economic standing of minority communities. While Trump made these points, what stood out most in the interview was Faulkner's personal connection to the George Floyd case. She spoke as a mother when she brought up Floyd's final moments when he called out for his own mother. That moment, for Faulkner and for so many others, was heartbreaking. It was a punch to the gut. She pointed out how different Floyd's death and the protests that followed were for people of color compared to how others might see them. So how did Trump handle this? What did he do during and after the interview? Trump's response. Well, it was not exactly a smooth back and forth. Trump mostly stuck to his talking points about law enforcement needing to be strong and the economic success his administration had achieved for black Americans. When Faulkner pushed him on how he felt about Floyd's death and the protests, Trump's answers tended to circle back to praising the police and emphasizing the need for order. He didn't really dig into the racial tensions or systemic issues that Faulkner and so many others were eager to address. At one point, Trump's comments about the protests and riots caused some controversy. He referenced a phrase that raised a lot of eyebrows. When the looting starts, the shooting starts. It is a phrase that had a long, problematic history and was not exactly what people were hoping to hear from the president during a time when tensions were so high. Faulkner asked him directly about this, pushing him to explain why he chose those words given how they had been received by the public. Trump defended the phrase, explaining that it had been misinterpreted, but for many, it didn't land well. What this interview ultimately highlighted was the tension between two very different approaches to the situation. Trump's focus on law and order and Faulkner's call for empathy, justice, and accountability. For Trump, it was about maintaining control and order in a time of chaos. But for Faulkner and many others, the conversation was about so much more. It was about addressing the deep-rooted inequalities that led to Floyd's death in the first place. Faulkner's question showed a deep understanding of what was at stake, not just for Floyd's family, but for the country as a whole. Trump's responses, however, often felt disconnected from the emotional weight of the moment. He spoke more as a politician defending his record than as a leader addressing a nation in pain. So what happened then? Was Harris successful in raising the voices of many from her community? The change. After the interview and the protests, thankfully we saw some change. What started as an outcry for justice over Floyd's death quickly turned into a global movement, pushing for real change in how police interact with people of color and how systemic racism is addressed in America and beyond. Following Floyd's death, protests erupted across all 50 US states and in countries around the world. People were marching not just for George Floyd, but for Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and countless others whose names had become synonymous with racial injustice. The message was clear that enough was enough. The Black Lives Matter movement, already a driving force, gained even more momentum as millions demanded reform in policing and an end to racial violence. The protests pressured local governments, police departments, and even national leaders to take action. Calls to defund the police became widespread. Some interpreted defund as reallocating police budgets to community services like mental health care and education, while others saw it as a call to completely dismantle police departments. The effects of these protests were almost immediate in some cities. For example, in Minneapolis, where Floyd was killed, the city council voted to dismantle the police department and replace it with a community-based public safety system. Across the country, several police departments started making changes. Many cities moved to ban chokeholds, like the one used on George Floyd. Some states, including New York, passed laws that made it easier to hold officers accountable for misconduct, while others required officers to intervene if they saw a colleague using excessive force. The protests also pushed for body cameras, de-escalation training, and more transparency in how police departments operated. One of the biggest impacts of the movement was the nationwide debate on qualified immunity, which is a legal doctrine that often shields police officers from being sued for their actions on the job. Activists demanded changes to this rule, arguing that it made it almost impossible to hold officers accountable for wrongful deaths. The protests also reached Washington, D.C. Congress saw the introduction of the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, which was a sweeping police reform bill that aimed to ban chokeholds, end racial profiling, and create a national registry of police misconduct. While the bill has faced challenges in the Senate, its introduction alone signaled a shift in how seriously the government was taking these issues. Meanwhile, President Trump signed an executive order aimed at encouraging police departments to improve standards and promote accountability. However, many activists and critics argued that these measures didn't go far enough and the push for broader reform continues. What's remarkable is how the George Floyd protests inspired movements around the world. From the UK to Australia, people took to the streets to protest their own country's issues with race and police violence. Statues of controversial historical figures were taken down, and conversations about colonialism, race, and privilege reached a global stage. And in making all that happen were millions of people who protested and, of course, Harris Faulkner, who voiced their concerns on national television. So where is Harris Faulkner now? And is she okay with Donald Trump running for president again? The recent announcement. We have now come from 2020 to 2024, and here we are again with Donald Trump back, campaigning for the 2024 presidency. After a chaotic first term and his controversial departure from the White House, many thought his political career was over, but as we have seen, Trump thrives on making comebacks, and he is back now rallying his massive base of supporters once more. But this time around, the competition is tougher. With President Joe Biden stepping down, Vice President Kamala Harris is emerging as a strong contender. She has positioned herself as the candidate to take over the reins, hoping to energize voters with her message of change and inclusion. However, the race is far from easy. Trump's rallies are packed, and despite the controversies, including a recent shooting incident targeting him, his supporters remain fiercely loyal. The political landscape is heating up, and it is anybody's game right now. And what about Harris Faulkner? In all the political chaos, Harris Faulkner is still going strong. She has kept her place as one of the leading voices in news, continuing to anchor the Faulkner Focus and co-host Outnumbered on Fox News. Harris is known for her straightforward approach, and she has never shied away from pointing out the hard truths, whether it is Trump, Kamala Harris, or anyone else. She holds everyone accountable regardless of political allegiance, but recently she made a huge announcement. Just when you think you have got it all figured out, we have got some breaking news. Harris Faulkner is leaving Fox News, that's right. After years of being one of the most recognizable faces on the network, she is stepping away. This news feels like the end of an era. Faulkner has been one of the best anchors on Fox News, delivering hard-hitting interviews and covering major stories with grace and determination. She has been a voice of reason and empathy, especially when it comes to tough issues like race, politics, and justice. Her departure leaves a significant gap in the network's lineup. So, what's next for Harris Faulkner? Well, there are plenty of theories. For starters, we know Faulkner is not someone who just fades into the background. She has already proven herself beyond the news desk. She has written 2 successful books where she shared her personal experiences, wisdom, and life lessons. And let's not forget her work on documentaries. She has tackled topics like race and the military, and it will not be surprising if she is planning more projects in this vein. Could she be launching her own media platform? Starting a production company for more documentaries? Maybe we will see more books on the way. Whatever it is, we know for sure that Harris Faulkner is not done making an impact. But still, her exit from Fox marks the end of a chapter not only for her, but for the network as well. That was all for today's video. If you want to hear more shocking stories, go ahead and subscribe to the channel because we have got a lot more of this. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.